It's betting time, baby. It's time to look at over-unders for schools across the country, for conferences across the country. They've been released. Who Vegas thinks going to be good, who thinks Vegas going to be bad, who thinks Vegas going to be just flat out mid in 2024 has been released. And I think I have some strong opinions on some, and whether they are, I think the over-unders high, whether I think the over-unders low, whether I think that is a really difficult over-under to predict, because I think it's going to be a somewhat difficult. There are programs that when you look at that over-under, you're like, damn, that's a tough one. And there are some that you're like, hammer the over, hammer the under. Whether it's the way that the schedule plays out, whether it's the way that maybe you don't think that team is getting the recognition that it deserves, or they're bringing back more that you think is better than what Vegas does, or they hit the transfer portal really hard, or you like this coach and think, they're the Mike Tomlin of college football, that they're never going to go less than 6-6 in a bowl game. Whatever the case may be, you can have really strong opinions on damn near everybody. And so today we're starting with my immediate reactions to the Big Ten over-unders. When you look at the now 18 schools who make up the Big Ten, their over-unders look like this. If you're watching on YouTube, obviously you can see them. But if you're listening on a podcast, Ohio State and Oregon are both at 10.5 on the over-unders. Penn State and Michigan, 9.5. There's a logjam at 7.5. USC, Washington, Nebraska, Iowa, and Maryland are all 7.5. Wisconsin is the lone 6.5 over-under. Rutgers, Northwestern, Michigan State, UCLA, Illinois, and Indiana are at 5.5. And then finally, Minnesota and Purdue are at 4.5 on the over-under win totals. I will tell you right now that there are some of these that I think are atrocious. That, like, really, you think that, or is it just flat out set up to get people to bet on those numbers with the express idea that, like, hey, we're going to make some cash off people who think that Maryland's going to go, Maryland's going to go 8-4. They're going to make some money off people like that. Like, obviously, there are skyscrapers in the desert for a reason. So the idea that, like, I'm going to be any smarter at this than they are is preposterous. It's poppycock. It's ridiculous. But damn it, I'm going to try. I'm going to tell you what I think. So here we go. I'm going to give you my ideas on what Big Ten over-unders look like. The ones that feel high to me, that feel like, okay, that's a lot. Oregon at 10.5 wins feels high to me. You go from, you're replacing your starting quarterback is kind of the big one for me. Like, when you look at, okay, Bo Nix was a transfer because, and not because, Bo Nix came in and was your guy. Now, I will say that the non-conference schedule for Oregon is not great. They play Idaho, Boise State, and at Oregon State. And their conference slate is not super difficult either. But they play Ohio State at home. They're at Michigan and home for Washington. Are there 2 losses in there? I think so, but I don't know. It's just getting through. Basically, the question is Oregon going to finish 11-1 or better? That's tough to do. So I think Oregon is a bit high. I think Michigan is in that same camp. 9.5 for the Wolverines feels like a lot, because not only are they replacing a quarterback like Oregon is with Bo Nix, Michigan is replacing damn near everybody. And their non-conference schedule is significantly more difficult than Oregon's is. Michigan's non-conference schedule is Fresno State, which is not a cakewalk by any stretch of the imagination. They probably still win that game handedly, but it's still is somewhat difficult of a group of 5 non-conference games you can have. Their second game is against Texas at home. Now, it's a home game, but it's against the number It's the team who's going to be ranked either first or second in the AP poll to start the season. So Texas is going to have some big shoes to fill. Or I beg your pardon, Michigan is going to have some big shoes to fill, and you get kind of thrown into the fire at the start of the season against Texas. Then they play USC at home, at Washington, home for Oregon, at Ohio State. Like those, are there 4 losses in there? Are there 3 losses in there even? If they go 9-3, you're under. So 9.5 feels pretty high to me with Michigan. So I don't. That's the kind of the way I look at the Wolverines. Is 9.5 feels pretty high, and then the rest that I think are pretty high are the teams that are on the lower ends. The Northwestern at 5.5. I feel like every year you think Northwestern's going to suck, they're okay, and every year you think Northwestern's going to be okay, they suck. So coming off a year where the expectations were about as low as they could be for a Power 5 program, Northwestern, things went really well for them. And so I feel like it's just almost one of those like, yeah, it's just going to be one of those years where Northwestern, the expectations might be like, hey, they're going to be all right. And then they are not all right. UCLA, 5.5. Obviously, part of this is you lose Chip Kelly as your head coach. You didn't have a stupendous season to begin with. So, and it's sort of similar with Oregon, right? Like you're leaving the Pac-12 where this past year was as good as any conference in America, and you're coming to the Big Ten where the perception is, hey, it's a little bit tougher top to bottom. But for UCLA, 5.5, basically you're asking, will they win 6 games? Their non-conference schedule is Hawaii, at LSU, and Fresno State. At Hawaii, at LSU, Fresno State. In addition to that, they play Oregon, at Penn State, at Nebraska, Iowa, at Washington, USC. It's a pretty difficult schedule, truth be told. I don't know that if they had played the 13th game that they could have gotten for playing at Hawaii, I would say maybe they could get to 6 wins. If they were playing 13 regular season games, maybe. But when your road trips for UCLA are at Hawaii, at LSU, at Penn State, at Rutgers, at Nebraska, at Washington, whew, that's a rough one. And your home games are Indiana, Oregon, Minnesota, Iowa, USC, Fresno State. It's not a great setup for the Bruins. Indiana, I think Curt Cignetti is going to do some nice things in Indiana, but I don't think it's going to be in 2024. Now, their non-conference is as bad as you can get for a Big Ten school. FIU, Western Illinois, Charlotte. There's probably 3 of the 5.5 wins that they get to right there, or that they're projected to right there. But at UCLA, Nebraska, Washington, Michigan, at Ohio State, it feels like that's a somewhat difficult stretch there of like, okay, you know what? Things maybe don't go just smashingly for the Hoosiers in 2024. And then finally, Purdue. I don't know how Purdue constantly gets into these kind of back and forths where like they'll hire somebody that just is like a slam dunk, absolute monster, great hire. And then when that person leaves, they hire a dumpster fire and they slide back down to being not great. But Ryan Walters felt like a somewhat uninspired hire to me when they hired him to begin with. Now, again, somewhat like Indiana, the non-conference isn't super difficult. You start the season with Indiana State, FCS program. There's a W. They play Notre Dame at home. That's a loss. And then at Oregon State, Beavers are going to be back to your dad's Oregon State. But then you run into a schedule here where it's Notre Dame at Oregon, Nebraska at Wisconsin. Ugh, tough. You also play Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State. Now they have games against Michigan State, Indiana, Northwestern, Illinois. Do I think they can win 4 games? Do I think they can win 5 games out of Indiana State, Oregon, Illinois, Northwestern, Michigan State, and Indiana? I don't know. I think it's 4. I think they're 4-8. So I don't have a great feeling that Purdue eclipses that over-under. Like 4.5, and nobody wants to be in a spot where 4.5 wins on the season is like, I don't know, man, that's a little high. Like, that does not bode well for the expectations for your season. But 4.5, when that feels like, I don't think you've got that even with an FCS school on the schedule. It's a bad spot to be in. The feels right category to me, Ohio State is at 10.5 wins. Essentially, you are asking, are they going to win 11 games? Yes, I think so. But 10, could they lose 2 games? When you look at the schedule, I don't think that's super outrageous to question if it's possible that they could lose 2 games. Got some somewhat difficult road trips at Oregon, at Penn State. Play Michigan at home. Outside of that, they don't have USC, don't have UCLA, don't have Washington. I mean, you look at the left column of the 6 teams with the somewhat highest win totals on the schedule for Ohio State. They play Oregon, they play Michigan, they play Penn State. They don't play USC, don't play Washington. They play Nebraska. But otherwise, it's not a murderer's row for the Buckeyes in the first year of the 18-team Big Ten. So does 10.5 feel like the right number? Yeah, because you're not going to put it at 11.5 because then you're saying, okay, we're predicting them to finish perfect. And nobody generally gets predicted to finish perfect. So 10.5 feels like the right number. Penn State at 9.5 feels like the right number to me. Start the season on the road at West Virginia, but then Bowling Green and Kent State. At worst, you're 2-1. There's a stretch there of 4 games in September and early October. Kent State, Illinois, UCLA, at USC. That's not a difficult schedule. Also, they're at Wisconsin, Ohio State, Washington, at Purdue, at Minnesota, Maryland. They don't play Michigan. They don't play Oregon. They don't play Iowa. They don't play Nebraska. I think it's a solid 9.5 for Penn State feels like the right number of like it could. They are either 10-2 or they are 9-3, and that's where the casinos and the sports books make their money. Is that 9.5 number is a difficult one to project for Penn State, but it feels like that is the right number. Rutgers at 5.5 wins feels like a right number to me, I think. And as well as Michigan State and Illinois. I think those are the teams that kind of benefit a little bit from the Big Ten being divisionless now, because Illinois doesn't play Washington. They don't play USC. They don't play Ohio State. They don't play. They do play Penn State, but they get a pretty easy Big Ten schedule with Michigan State and Minnesota, Purdue, Northwestern. You get some wins in there for Illinois. Michigan State has a completely new staff, and they've got maybe as rough of anybody with they get Ohio State, at Oregon, at Michigan. But then at the end of the season, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, into Indiana, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers is the Final Four for Michigan State. And their non-conference is Florida Atlantic, Prairie View, A&M, and Boston College. Yeah, I like the Spartans' chances of getting to 6 wins. But 5.5 feels like the right number for a first-year head coach. So I think those are the numbers that, like, yeah, that makes sense to me why you would set those numbers the way you set them. Because you can't project everybody to be like, okay, there's 12-0, 10-2, 10-2, 9-3, 8-4, 6-6, 6-6, 6-6, 6-6, 3-9. Like, it's just not. You got to get people to put some money on this. So you have numbers that don't make a whole lot of sense, and then the numbers that feel just like they are low in the win columns. To me, I think USC it's 7.5. Is USC going to win 8 games in 2024? I think so, because I think I get the idea of Lincoln Riley did not finish the season spectacularly, right? Like, things were not viewed as a smashing success with a Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback in 2024. Now, there are some people who will tell you they had the absolute worst defensive coordinator in college football as their defensive coordinator last year. And I think part of the looking at the 2024 schedule and USC, basically, are they going to win 8 games, is that their non-conference is pretty difficult. Their non-conference is as difficult as anybody has, I would argue, in college football. They've got a neutral site game against LSU to open the season on the Sunday before Labor Day. Then they play Utah State, which obviously isn't a barn burner, but the final game of the year is Notre Dame. And I realize who knows what Notre Dame is at the end of November. But on paper, on February 12th, Notre Dame and LSU in your non-conference is somewhat difficult. Then you go at Michigan, you play Penn State, you're at Washington, you're at UCLA, you avoid Ohio State, you avoid Oregon. So the 2 top dogs that are viewed as the over-under champions there in the Big Ten, USC doesn't play. And even if you say, hey, it's likely that they lose to both Notre Dame and LSU, I don't think that's a ridiculous argument to make. But if they lose, basically, if they beat one of Michigan, Penn State, or Washington, they're at 8-4. So I think USC feels just slightly low. Like, I still believe in Lincoln Riley. And it might be one of those that, like, midway through the 2024 season, I'll be like, you know what? This is Lincoln Riley in 2024 is going to be my Clemson in 2023, where I was hesitant to get off the bandwagon that Clemson could still return to being a dominant player in college football in 2023. Now, I think that ship has sailed. I think it's over. And at some point, you have to deal with Dabo Swinney. But that's a topic for another discussion, probably later this week when we look at the ACC over-unders. But I'm not ready to give up on Lincoln Riley like so many other people are. So I will believe that USC at 7.5 feels low. I worry that Washington is going to be the 2024 version of TCU in 2023, where they made the national championship game and everybody's like, oh man, like, this is a team that's still going to be really good. And they lose a bunch. But Washington is helped by a bad non-conference schedule. Weber State, Eastern Michigan, Washington State. And their conference schedule is not great. Northwestern, Rutgers, Indiana, Iowa, UCLA. Basically, if you're going to get to 8 wins for Washington, you can lose to Michigan, Iowa, Penn State, and Oregon and still be 8-4. Basically, there are 5 difficult games for them in the 2024 schedule in the Big Ten. Michigan, Iowa, USC, Penn State, Oregon. If you win one of those and don't lose to somebody that's the Rutgers, Northwestern, Indiana, UCLA bunch, you're 8-4. Washington feels low to me. Is it a foregone conclusion that they lose all 4 to Michigan, USC, Penn State, Oregon? I don't think so. So Washington at 7.5 feels low to me. I think Nebraska is building towards something really good in the Big Ten with Matt Rule. I don't know that Nebraska is building towards, like, Tom Osborne national championship level of program. I don't know that Nebraska's even. I think Nebraska can get to that spot of being in that group of schools who can win the Big Ten once every 4 or 5 years. And that might be the ceiling in Big Ten Nebraska, just because they don't have the ability to go into Texas and say, hey, if you come from Texas to Nebraska, you're going to play 3 or 4 or 5 games a year in Texas. Your family's going to be able to come see you, blah, blah, blah. You're not going to get that in the Big Ten. Like, it's not something that the Big Ten offers Nebraska. But I think Nebraska is building something. I think Matt Rule is the right guy for the job, but at the same time, I thought Scott Frost was the guy for the job at Nebraska. I think the numbers feel low for Minnesota just a little bit. And I think it's easy to somewhat forget about Minnesota just because there's just not a whole lot there for them to celebrate or be viewed as this, potential juggernaut. And I don't think they are by any stretch of the imagination, but the non-conference, Rhode Island, Nevada, North Carolina, are you 2-1 out of the chute? Now they have a somewhat difficult conference schedule: Iowa, Michigan, USC, Penn State, at Wisconsin. So you're banking on kind of a three-run stretch there where you get a win over UCLA, Illinois, Rutgers, and you hope you went 2-1 in the non-conference. I would say they'll lose to North Carolina. I don't think that's an outrageous take. If you're 2-1 and you win 3 Big Ten games in a schedule that features Iowa, Michigan, USC, UCLA, Maryland, Illinois, Rutgers, Penn State, Wisconsin, if you can beat USC, or you can beat UCLA, Illinois, Rutgers, there's 5. So I think it feels just slightly low. I don't believe me. I'm not sitting here saying Maryland or Minnesota or any of these teams are super underrated, that they're going to be 9-3 and the darlings of the college football world. I don't think any of that. But Minnesota at 4-5 feels like, is there a path for them to get to 5 or 6 wins? I think so. Is there also a path for them to finish 2-10? Maybe. I feel like PJ Fleck is somewhat of a glorified cheerleader as the head coach of that program, and at some point that comes to a head. And whether that's in 2024 or not, I don't know. But I think they can get to 5 wins. And maybe that's something at the end of the year. I'll be like, how the hell did I thought Minnesota was going to get to 5 wins? But that'll be fun to look back on later and be like, oh, you know what? I didn't do very well with that. But that's the start of looking at the over-unders this week for the Power 4 conferences in 2024. And we'll do more of that here later this week on the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content that we're pumping out here on Saturday Glory. If you are listening to our podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. See you tomorrow right here on the Daily Huddle with Saturday Glory.